The words landed sharper than the silver carving knife my father held in his hand. You're no longer part of this family. The clinking of glasses, the faint pop of fireplace logs, the hum of soft carols on the radio, all of it blurred in that single instant. The entire room seemed to freeze, yet no one looked shocked. Not one. My brothers' faces were too quick to twist into smug smiles, as if they had rehearsed for this exact performance. This is not just another story. It's a dark, emotional journey of betrayal and revenge. Don't miss a single second because every detail leads to the shocking moment no one saw coming. I kept my eyes steady, watching my father hand over a stack of crisp envelopes across the table. Deeds, shares, signatures, all bound neatly in leather folders. The business that carried our family name. The company I had poured half my life into. Handed over like candy canes at a Christmas parade, except not to me. To them. My brothers smirked, already sitting taller in their chairs as though the weight of paper made them kings. One of them even straightened his tie, though he never wore one properly in his life. I didn't argue. Didn't reach across the table. Didn't beg. I only adjusted the napkin on my lap, folding it once, then twice, careful, precise. Come. The same way I had learned to hold myself during storms, quietly without rattling the glass. Because while they celebrated, while they laughed at my expense, I carried something none of them could see. Something tucked away waiting for the right time. The dining room smelled of roasted turkey and sage stuffing, a scent that should have meant comfort but instead turned bitter in my throat. I could taste the metallic tang of betrayal more than the cranberry sauce on my plate. The tree in the corner blinked with lights, red and gold ornaments spinning slowly as the air vent hummed. My mother, long gone from this world, had collected those ornaments. Each one was a memory of her steady hands, her soft laughter, her way of making Christmas mean something. Tonight, her ornaments felt like silent witnesses to the ugliness spilling across the table. I noticed small things others missed. My father's hand shook slightly as he signed the last paper. His knuckles, once strong from years of work, looked worn, cracked, older. He was a man trying to preserve a legacy by placing it in the wrong hands. My brother's plates sat untouched, the food growing cold while their greed filled their stomachs instead. I cut a piece of turkey, chewed it slowly and forced a swallow. The dryness caught in my throat, but I refused to reach for water. Not while their eyes searched me for weakness. One of them, Michael, leaned forward. His grin was wide, too wide. Guess you finally got what you wanted, Dad. A real family business. The other, James, added, without the dead weight. Their laughter was quick, shallow, echoing too loudly in the decorated room. Even the dog stirred uncomfortably under the table, shifting as if sensing the tension pressing against us all. I kept my voice even, almost soft. Well, isn't that something? Michael's grin faltered for a second, maybe expecting me to fight. James raised his glass, clinking it against Dad's with a smugness that reeked. Here's to the new future, he said. I raised mine too, though my lips never touched the rim. I only let the wine sit still, catching the glow of the Christmas lights. The conversation moved on, but it wasn't natural. Every word felt forced, heavy, as though even the walls leaned in to listen. I noticed small shifts, the maid moving slower than usual, avoiding my gaze, the way the radio announcer's voice crackled in the silence between clinks of cutlery, the faint smell of smoke from the fireplace growing thicker, heavier. The unease grew like frost spreading across a window. And yet no one but me seemed to feel it. My heart beat steady, not fast. It wasn't anger that controlled me. It was calculation. For years I had been treated like an outsider. The one who worked hardest but got praised the least, the one who carried weight without recognition. I had learned how to live in silence. But silence is never weakness. Sometimes it's the sharpest weapon. At one point, James dropped his fork, the metal clattering against the china. He chuckled awkwardly, but I watched his hand tremble as he picked it up. Nerves. They were all nerves beneath their show. I leaned back in my chair, studying the flickering candlelight. Shadows stretched long across the table, bending the faces of my brothers into something grotesque. It struck me how easily power twisted features, how quickly love could sour when greed entered the room. I wanted to laugh at their arrogance, but I didn't. I only folded my napkin again, neat, tight, almost surgical. A small act, but enough to remind myself. Control is not loud. Control is quiet. Then came the moment that cracked the mask. Nico, my nephew, only 12, suddenly burst out in that innocent way children do. His voice cut through the tension like bells. "She's on Forbes," he blurted, pointing at me with sauce still on his fingers. The room went still. Forks froze mid-air, glasses halted halfway to lips. My father's eyes flicked to me for the first time all night. My brother's laughter curdled into silence. "What?" Michael asked too quickly. Nico shrugged, confused by their shock. "She's on Forbes. I saw it at the store. Her picture's right on the cover." I smiled then, small and deliberate. I didn't deny it. Didn't explain. I let their imaginations do the work. The room felt smaller suddenly, the fire hotter, the walls closer. Michael shifted in his seat. James cleared his throat. My father stared down at his wine, his lips pressed thin. I lifted my glass at last, sipped slowly, and placed it down with a soft clink against the table. "Strange, isn't it?" I said quietly, "how people think they know everything, until they don't." The words hung heavy in the air, heavier than the snow falling outside, thicker than the smoke curling from the fireplace. And in that silence, their silence, I saw fear bloom for the very first time. I didn't explain further. I didn't need to. Not yet. The silence from that Christmas night still lingered when I left the table. Their eyes had followed me, but not one of them dared speak. The moment the door shut behind me, I knew the tide had shifted. They might have cut me out with ink and signatures, but I carried something they couldn't replace. And in the days that followed, I made sure they felt it. I didn't storm out forever. No, I stayed close as I always had. I lived only 3 streets away, in the same modest house I'd kept even when the company was thriving. For years I'd been the one who cooked, organized, smoothed the cracks no one else noticed. Without me, the routines of that family began to unravel faster than winter lights tossed in a tangled box. The first cracks showed in the simplest places. On New Year's morning, James called. His voice was clipped, irritated. "Where's the recipe for Mom's cinnamon rolls? The housekeeper says she can't find it." I could almost hear the chaos behind him. Drawers slamming, pots clanging, children whining. I pictured the kitchen counters dusted with flour, his wife trying to calm everyone while he barked orders. "It's in the green notebook," I said evenly. "Second shelf, next to the spice rack." There was a pause. Then a muttered curse. "I don't see it. Just forget it." The call ended abruptly. I set the phone down, smiling faintly. Because I knew exactly where the notebook was. I had taken it with me weeks before. Food was only the beginning. Every Tuesday for years I had placed the orders for the household pantry, making sure the deliveries arrived before the cupboards ran bare. Without me, deliveries came late, wrong, or not at all. One evening, I heard from a neighbor that Michael had been seen carrying grocery bags through the snow, his shoes soaked, muttering angrily under his breath. "He looked different," the neighbor said. "Tired. Lost almost." I only nodded, offering no explanation. The family dinners grew strained. I didn't attend, of course, I wasn't invited anymore, but word traveled in small towns faster than wind through bare branches. People whispered about the burnt roasts, the forgotten guests, the fights that erupted over nothing. It wasn't just food they missed. It was rhythm. For years, I'd been the one to remember birthdays, to send thank you notes, to call when someone was ill. When those small touches vanished, the gaps showed. Friends stopped visiting as often. Neighbors grew distant. The family that once seemed unshakable began to look brittle under the surface. And I watched quietly, going about my days with a steady calm. I still walked to the market each Saturday morning. The air was cold, sharp, carrying the smell of oranges and pine from the vendors. People greeted me warmly, asking about recipes, sharing news, confiding small troubles. That trust had been built over years of listening, of remembering details others forgot. One vendor leaned closer, voice lowered. "Your brothers, they're struggling, aren't they?" I didn't answer directly. I just adjusted the bag of apples in my arms. "Everyone has a season," I said softly. The vendor gave a knowing nod. By February, the cracks widened into rifts. James showed up at my doorstep one evening, unshaven, his coat hanging loosely. He stood there shifting from foot to foot like a schoolboy caught in a lie. I need the supplier list," he muttered. I folded my arms, leaning against the door frame. "The list I managed for 15 years? The one you said was busy work?" He looked away, jaw tightening. "I just can't find it." I held his gaze, letting the silence stretch. "It's not mine to give any more," I said finally. Father made sure of that. The flicker of shame on his face was almost enough to make me soften. Almost. But I didn't. He left empty-handed, shoulders slumped. The truth was, I had never hoarded knowledge out of spite. I had simply carried what others ignored. I knew which farmer delivered eggs that stayed fresh longest. I knew which banker could be trusted and which clerk cut corners. I knew when to stock up before storms, when to save receipts, when to mend rather than buy new. These were the bones of survival, bones they had stripped bare when they dismissed me. And now without them they starved. The whispers grew louder in town. At the cafe on Main Street I overheard two women speaking. Michael's wife came in crying yesterday. Said the bills were late, the pantry empty. I thought they were doing well. Didn't their father give them everything? Apparently not enough. I stirred my tea slowly, pretending not to listen, though every word sank deep. One snowy afternoon I passed their house. The curtains were drawn, but voices carried through thin walls. Shouting, sharp and angry. A child crying. Then a crash, a glass breaking. I kept walking, my boots crunching in the snow, but my chest tightened. This wasn't joy for me. It wasn't satisfaction. It was something colder, heavier. For years I had fed them, not just with meals but with patience, with labor, with love. Now stripped of those things they withered. And though part of me ached, another part whispered that they had chosen this. They had cut me out, and in doing so, cut out the very piece that kept them whole. March brought more proof. Michael called this time. His voice was lower, strained. Could you, maybe just look over the household accounts? Nothing major, just a quick glance. I let the silence hang a little too long before answering. I'm retired from that work, Michael. You'll manage. He sighed, the sound of a man who hadn't slept. Right. Sure. The line clicked dead. I sat there afterward, the quiet of my little house pressing in. For a moment guilt pricked at me. But then I remembered his smirk at Christmas, the way he had raised his glass to toast my erasure. The guilt faded. By spring the unraveling was impossible to hide. The family garden, once thriving under my care, stood brown and neglected. The shutters peeled paint, the porch sagged. What had once been a proud home looked weary, as if reflecting the people inside. Neighbors spoke less kindly now. They've lost their touch, one muttered at the post office. Pride comes before a fall, another whispered in the bakery line. I said nothing, only tucked my letters under my arm and walked home through the damp spring air. Still they tried to maintain appearances. Easter Sunday I saw them arrive at church, dressed neatly, heads held high. But their eyes gave them away. Hollow, darting, restless. Their children clung to their sides, clothes a little too small, shoes scuffed. And as the choir sang, I sat in the back pew, hands folded, watching the family I had once fed with every ounce of myself. Watching them starve slowly, not for food, but for the unseen work I had always given. One evening in late April, as the sun dipped low and the air smelled of rain, I received a letter slipped under my door. No envelope, no signature. Just a sheet of paper. We need you. Please. Come back. I stared at the words, the ink pressed too hard, smudged in places. Maybe from hurried writing, maybe from a trembling hand. I folded the paper neatly, placed it in the drawer with the rest of my keepsakes, and blew out the lamp. Because I knew, this was only the beginning. I folded the unsigned letter, slid it into the drawer and closed it gently. The wood creaked, the sound lingering in the small silence of my house. For a moment I just stood there, hand resting on the knob, listening to the rain tapping softly against the window. They thought one piece of paper would undo years of disregard. But I wasn't the same woman they had dismissed at that Christmas table. I blew out the lamp and went to bed with the letter still echoing in my mind. The very next morning whispers began to spread. At the market 2 men argued near the produce stand. Something about a deal collapsing, a shipment delayed. Their voices carried, sharp and restless. I kept my head down, choosing apples with deliberate calm. But then one of them lowered his voice and muttered a name. James. I froze for just a second before setting the apple in my basket. James had always bragged about his business sense. He wore it like a badge. But now, in the middle of spring, partners were pulling away from him. To anyone else it might have looked like coincidence. Bad timing. Bad luck. But I knew better. It had started small. Quiet. A misplaced call here, a delayed payment there. I'd built my life around details and I knew exactly where to press. James was careless. He never double-checked figures, never kept records straight. One gentle nudge, one carefully timed reminder to the right person, and suddenly his numbers didn't add up. Contracts slipped. Trust cracked. When neighbors spoke of his troubles, they shook their heads with sympathy. Poor James, always so hardworking. It's just bad luck, I suppose. I smiled politely, never agreeing, never correcting. Inside, though, I thought luck has nothing to do with it. Michael wasn't spared either. One afternoon, I sat on the church steps after choir practice. The spring air smelled faintly of lilacs, warm and damp. Across the street, Michael stumbled out of the tavern, his tie crooked, his face flushed. Two men followed close behind, speaking in low voices. I couldn't hear the words, but I recognized the tone, the clipped sound of a deal gone sour. Later that week, word reached me through a friend at the bank. Michael had borrowed more than he could return. Cards, dice, backroom wagers. It didn't matter. The debts were stacking and people were losing patience. And again, whispers in town. Terrible misfortune. That family can't catch a break. I folded my hymn book against my chest and thought, breaks don't just happen. They're made. It wasn't vengeance in the loud, dramatic sense. I didn't slam doors or raise my voice. I only watched where they stumbled, and I placed the stones just right for them to trip harder. James had a habit of ignoring fine print. So I made sure new contracts came with plenty of it. Michael trusted the wrong men too quickly. So I introduced him subtly to ones who smiled wide but played sharp. None of it illegal. None of it obvious. Just careful work. Work I had mastered after decades of being underestimated. One evening in May, I received a phone call. Hello. I answered, setting down the basket of folded laundry. Pause. Then my father's voice, low and tight. They're saying James lost another supplier. Is it true? I let a moment pass before answering. I've heard the same. His breath came heavy through the line. This isn't how it was supposed to go. I closed my eyes, picturing his face, the lines etched deeper since that Christmas night. Things rarely go as planned, I said softly. He didn't reply. The line went dead. By June, the talk of bad luck had turned to gossip. At the grocery, two women in front of me whispered about Michael's wife selling jewelry. At the pharmacy, I overheard a clerk mention James arguing with a creditor. I moved through these moments quietly, like water slipping around stones. On the outside, I was the same steady woman, humming softly as I checked off shopping lists. Inside, though, there was a steady flame. Because every time someone said bad luck, I thought of all the years I'd carried the family on my back and how they'd dismissed it as nothing. Now they were learning what nothing felt like. One Sunday afternoon, I stopped at the cafe for tea. The air smelled of brewed coffee and buttered toast. A man I barely knew leaned over from the next table. You must be heartbroken watching your family go through this. I stirred my tea slowly. The spoon clinked against the porcelain. Heartbroken? I repeated, tilting my head. No. I'm watching them discover the truth. He blinked, startled by my calm tone, then shifted uncomfortably and returned to his plate. The truth was, guilt visited me sometimes, like a draft seeping under a closed door. When I saw their children at church in worn clothes, or when I passed the house and caught the sound of another argument, my heart ached. But guilt never stayed long. Because then I remembered their laughter that Christmas night, the way they toasted to my erasure. And guilt turned to steel. By midsummer, desperation showed plain. James knocked on my door one humid evening. His shirt clung with sweat, his collar open. Please, he said, voice rough. Just help me sort through the papers. I can't make sense of them anymore. I leaned against the doorframe, the cicadas buzzing loud in the trees. I told you before, James. It's not mine to manage anymore. His shoulders sagged, his eyes rimmed red. They're saying we're cursed. Do you believe that? I held his gaze. No, James. I don't believe in curses. And I closed the door gently, leaving him standing in the thick summer air. The word curse spread quickly after that. People whispered that the family was paying for arrogance, for pride, for sins left unspoken. Some crossed the street to avoid them. Others looked on with pity. But me? I simply continued my days. Cooking. Tending my garden. Visiting the market. To them it was bad fortune. To me it was the inevitable result of careful work. One night in August, as the crickets sang and the air smelled of cut grass, I sat on my porch with a cup of tea. The stars were faint behind thin clouds. I thought about the letter still folded in my drawer, about my father's voice on the phone, about James's desperate eyes. They believed they were drowning in bad luck. But I knew the truth. Luck is chance. This was not. This was years of being unseen finally given shape. It was my patience, my silence, sharpened into a blade they never saw coming. And it was only just beginning. That thought had barely cooled in my mind when the first real collapse came. It wasn't whispered gossip this time, or the quiet unraveling of small routines. Oh, this was the sound of the roof caving in. Loud, undeniable. By September, the family business wasn't limping anymore. It was on its knees. I heard about it on a Tuesday morning. The air was crisp, the first bite of autumn already here, the smell of damp leaves clinging to the street. I was folding laundry when the phone rang. It was Mrs. Turner from church. Her voice carried a mix of pity and thrill. Did you hear? James's factory shut down this morning. Workers sent home without pay. Terrible business. They say investors pulled out overnight. I murmured something polite, thanked her for letting me know, and hung up. My hands rested on the still warm towels in the basket. The news didn't surprise me. It only came sooner than I expected. The factory had been bleeding for months, cracks widening with each missed shipment, each lost deal. James had called it bad luck. I called it gravity finally doing its work. Not 3 days later, Michael's troubles spilled into the open too. I was leaving the grocery store when I spotted him across the parking lot. His hair was disheveled, his shirt half-tucked, and his eyes darted like a man cornered. He was speaking in hushed tones to 2 men near a dark car. Their arms were crossed, their stances sharp. I didn't need to hear the words to know. Debts. Collectors. Promises he couldn't keep. When he turned, his eyes met mine for the briefest second. A flicker of shame crossed his face, followed by something else. Desperation. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but then closed it quickly, turning back to the men. I carried my bags home, the handles cutting into my palms. By October, their pride had cracked wide open. James showed up first. Late evening, rain slick on the sidewalks, his knock soft but urgent. I opened the door to see him standing there, shoulders hunched, clothes damp. I need help, he said simply. His voice had lost the arrogance, the certainty. Now it carried the weight of a man drowning. I stepped aside, letting him into my modest living room. He looked around as if seeing it for the first time. The neat shelves, the warm lamp glow, the smell of soup on the stove. A house alive, steady while his own world burned down. He sank onto the chair, rubbing his face. We've lost almost everything. The suppliers won't answer. Investors are gone. Even the workers. They look at me like I've betrayed them. I watched him carefully, stirring the soup with measured calm. And what do you expect me to do, James? He lifted his head, eyes rimmed red. You know how to fix this. You always did. Just guide me. Please. His words were a bitter echo of all the times he'd dismissed me. But now he sat in my home asking. I placed a bowl of soup in front of him, the steam rising. Eat, I said softly. We'll talk after. Days later, Michael arrived. Unlike James, he didn't bother with humility. He barged in, pacing the length of my living room, his voice sharp with panic. They're threatening me. Do you understand? Real threats. If I don't pay, if I don't. I raised a hand, steady, cutting through his frenzy. Sit down, Michael. He stopped, chest heaving, and for the first time I saw the fear beneath his bluster. He collapsed into the chair opposite me, burying his face in his hands. They'll ruin me, he whispered. Ruin us all. I leaned back, hands folded in my lap. You already ruined yourself, Michael. I warned you years ago about the company you kept. He flinched but didn't argue. As he knew I was right. And then came my father. It was late October, the air sharp with wood smoke, the trees bare. I heard the knock, slow and heavy, and when I opened the door he was there. Smaller somehow, his frame stooped, his face older than I remembered. May I come in? He asked. His voice carried none of the booming authority it once did. I nodded and stepped aside. He sat at my table, the same table where I'd mended clothes and balanced books for years. His eyes lingered on the little details. The vase of marigolds, the stack of folded linens, the neatness of a home kept by hands that worked with care. Finally he spoke. I was wrong. The words hung heavy between us. For a long time he had been a man who never admitted fault. But tonight, under the hum of the lamp, he said them. I thought giving the company to your brothers would preserve the family. Instead, I destroyed it. I studied him, the man who had cut me out of my own bloodline without a tremor in his hand. Now his voice shook. You can still save them, he said quietly. You can still save us. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I stood and poured tea, the scent of chamomile filling the room. I placed the cup before him, watching the steam curl upward. Why should I asked softly. He looked at me, then truly looked as though seeing me for the first time. Because you're stronger than all of us. You always were. And I was too blind to see it. His admission pressed against old wounds, reopening them, but it also lit something else. A strange mix of vindication and sorrow. I sipped my own tea, letting the warmth spread. Strength doesn't come from being noticed, I said. It comes from surviving when no one notices at all. He lowered his gaze. For once he had no reply. The weeks that followed were a parade of broken men. James returned again and again, papers in hand, asking me to explain figures he couldn't read. Michael pleaded for introductions, for someone to negotiate on his behalf. Even my father lingered, quiet, waiting for crumbs of guidance. They had once laughed at me for keeping ledgers, for knowing which cupboard held what, for remembering the names of every worker. Now those skills were lifelines they reached for in their drowning. And each time I offered just enough. A word here, a nudge there. Enough to keep them crawling back. By Thanksgiving, the house that had once been the pride of the family looked broken. The shutters sagged, the porch steps cracked. Inside, arguments echoed through the walls. Voices raised, then silenced, then raised again. Neighbors whispered that the family had lost its grip. Church friends shook their heads. But behind closed doors in my quiet little house, I watched them gather like moths to a flame they had once mocked. One evening, James sat across from me, his head in his hands. Tell me what to do, he said, voice cracked. Michael leaned against the wall, eyes dark with exhaustion. We can't hold it together anymore. And my father, standing in the doorway, silent but waiting for me to fix what he had broken. I let the silence stretch, heavy and deliberate. Finally, I said, you wanted me gone. You wanted me erased. But here you are, at my table. They looked at me, desperate, hollow. And I realized, with a calm colder than winter, that I finally held the power they had stolen. But I didn't reveal what I planned to do with it. Not yet. That was for Christmas. Snow fell heavy that year, blanketing the town in quiet white. The streets were hushed, only the crunch of boots breaking the stillness. Lights twinkled faintly in windows, wreaths hung on doors, and the air smelled of pine and wood smoke. I walked the familiar path up to the old family house, the same one where I had once been erased with a single sentence. My steps were steady, each crunch of snow beneath my boots a reminder that I was not the same woman who had left this house a year before. The windows glowed with light, laughter spilling faintly into the cold. They had gathered again as though nothing had changed. But everything had. I didn't knock. I opened the door and stepped inside. The room fell silent. Michael's glass froze halfway to his lips. James pushed back from the table, his chair scraping against the wood. My father stood at the head, his hand still on the carving knife. I looked around, my gaze moving slowly, taking in every detail. The turkey steaming on the platter. The candles flickering, casting long shadows. The ornaments glinting on the tree, the same ones my mother had hung decades ago. It was all the same. And yet I could feel the fear now. Thick, unspoken, pressing against the walls. I set a bottle of wine on the table, the glass clinking sharply. Merry Christmas, I said evenly. No one spoke. Not at first. Then James cleared his throat. You shouldn't just walk in here. His voice cracked on the last word. Why not? I asked softly. It's my house after all. Michael frowned. Your house. This is. Check the papers, I cut in. Every debt you signed, every loan you begged for. They all came through me. Quietly, piece by piece, I bought them. The company. The land. Even this house. I let the words settle, heavy as snowfall. You don't own this place anymore, I finished. I do. Their faces drained of color. My father's hand trembled on the knife. He set it down carefully, staring at me as though seeing a ghost. You wouldn't. I met his eyes. I already did. Michael pushed back from the table, his voice rising. You planned this. You wanted us ruined. I tilted my head. No. You ruined yourselves. I just made sure the fall wasn't cushioned. The silence cracked into pleading then. James leaned forward, hands outstretched. We can fix this. Together. Just tell us what to do. Michael's voice followed, sharper, desperate. You can't just strip us of everything. We're your family. I laughed then, low and bitter. Family? You cut me out of that circle long ago. You toasted to my erasure. Don't speak of family now when it suits you. My father rose slowly, his voice gravelly. You've made your point. You've shown your strength. But what does revenge buy you? Emptiness. I looked at him, really looked. His shoulders hunched, his pride broken, his legacy turned to ash. Once those words might have pierced me. But not anymore. Revenge doesn't buy emptiness, I said. It buys freedom. It buys truth. And tonight it buys me closure. I reached into my bag and pulled out a folded stack of documents. I laid them on the table one by one. The deeds. The titles. The debts signed and sealed. Their eyes followed every sheet, their hands trembling as they recognized the signatures. Their own, written in arrogance, written in desperation. You thought the family name would protect you, I said. You thought luck or charm or inheritance would shield you. But a name is just letters on paper. What matters is who holds the pen. I tapped the papers. And now that's me. The room was thick with silence, broken only by the faint crackle of the fire. Michael sank into his chair, his head in his hands. James stared at the table, his lips moving as if in prayer. My father stood frozen, his chest rising and falling heavy. And I felt a calm settle over me, colder and steadier than the snow outside. I poured myself a glass of wine, the liquid catching the candlelight. I raised it slightly. To the family name, I said quietly. May it rest in peace. I drank, the bitterness sharp on my tongue. No one stopped me when I stood to leave. I walked to the door, my boots clicking against the wood floor. At the threshold I turned back once more. The room looked smaller now, the proud men reduced to shadows against the glow of the tree. You erased me from the family, I said. But tonight I erase the family itself. From this day on the name you clung to is buried. And in its place I build mine. Their faces twisted with disbelief, with fear, with the slow dawning of truth. I stepped out into the snow, pulling the door shut behind me. Outside the air was sharp, biting clean. Snowflakes caught in my hair, melted against my cheeks. The street was quiet, the world hushed as though holding its breath. I walked home with steady steps, the weight of years lifting with each crunch of snow beneath my boots. The old family name was gone. Its pride, its arrogance, its cruelty, all buried under the wreckage of their choices. Me. I was free. Free to carve a life of my own, not bound by their erasures, not chained to their failures. A name not inherited, not granted, but built. Built by my hands, my patience, my careful work. When I reached my little house, the lamp glowed warmly in the window. I stepped inside, the familiar scent of pine and bread wrapping around me like an embrace. I set the wine bottle on the counter, slipped off my boots and sat by the fire. For the first time in years I felt something steady and whole inside me. Not bitterness. Not even triumph. Just peace. I thought of my mother then. Her ornaments on the tree, her laughter that once filled the house. She would not have wanted the cruelty, the greed, the cutting out of one bloodline for another. But I believed she would have understood what I had done. She would have seen the strength it took to survive, to endure, and to finally stand. The fire crackled, casting long shadows on the walls. I leaned back, closed my eyes, and let the warmth sink into me. The family name was gone. Buried. And in its place I carved my own. They gave me silence and I turned it into power. They gave me exile and I built an empire. And now I am no longer theirs, I am mine. If this story gripped your heart and gave you chills, subscribe now for more powerful revenge stories of betrayal, resilience, and justice. Your next unforgettable story is just one click away.